Tessaro, the outgoing news director at KCLY Radio, and I think most of the local folks know that, those that live in Clay Center. Anyway, this is my very last day on the air, my last legislative update. Sitting with me here today is Senator Tom Hawk from the 22nd Senate District in the state of Kansas, and also Susie Carlson, 64th House District Representative, her first time on the air here at KCLY for the legislative update. Our program for years now has been sponsored by AT&T, and we continue to thank them for doing that. Tom, I noticed, or Senator Hawk.
Yeah, call me Tom.
Okay, Tom. I noticed that AT&T has sponsored other legislative coffees and updates in other parts of the KCLY community. So you're probably spending a lot of time thanking AT&T these days.
I am. They're very active, and they're very active on the lobby front, too.
Okay.
And like most lobby groups, I agree with them half the time.
Okay, well, there you go. Well, Representative Carlson, Susie, my longtime friend Susie, it is so good to see you here. And she's dressed in red today, so it's a great color. It's a great color. Not because of a team or anything, don't get me wrong.
Oh, no, and Senator Hawk is dressed in blue, and I'm sure that has nothing to do with parties or anything like that.
It has to do with mourning K-State's loss at the end of a great game last night. But I'm still celebrating in my purple haze the fact that we won the Big 12 championship a week ago.
Absolutely.
Well, we got to keep our, our priorities straight. So there you go. I'm glad you set us straight this morning.
But I would like to say that Michelle has been such a large part of our KCLY area that's covered so many, all the things of Clay Center, and we will miss her tremendously. She has been such a fabulous addition to this station and this community, but I can't wait to see what she does moving forward with her photography and enjoying all of her grandchildren, and we look forward to see lots and lots of really good things from her.
Thank you, dear. That's very much appreciated.
I have to second that, too, because when I, at the time, foolishly thought I was just getting into this campaign, was pretty sure I would lose, and started coming over here, walking door to door. One of the first persons I saw driving down the street was Michelle, and had a chance to meet her and have had several radio shows. And I think you're just a real pro at this and easy to talk to. We may let you talk, Susie and I may let you talk a little bit later on, but really I think it leaves a big hole. But I'm also envious because I've got 4 grandkids that I miss. And I also was a photographer, and I haven't had a chance to do much in that. So you may be the lead for me in the next few years when hopefully I decide to retire.
You come back to photography, then I'll be the lead. You be my second shooter.
All right, that would be fun.
Oh goodness. Well, once again, our thanks to AT&T, and we like to go ladies first. So Susie, I have not had an opportunity to look at your most recent newsletter, and I prefer that you tell me anyway what committees that you are on and what maybe some of what you're learning. But start with the committees, and then we're going to bounce to Tom and then come back to you, okay?
Okay, yes. My committees are children and seniors, and they meet every day from 1:30 to 3. And then I am on the social services budget, and they meet daily from 3:30 to 5. And then financial institution and pensions, and we meet Monday and Wednesday at 9 a.m. Which I think everyone around this community is familiar with. Susan Concannon, the representative of Beloit, is the chairman of the Children and Senior Citizens, or Seniors, and Will Carpenter from El Dorado is the chairman of Social Services, and Jim Kelly from Independence is the chairman of the Financial Institution and Pensions. And I would like to say that Susie Swanson did tell me that whatever committees you are put on, that those committees are only as good as their chairman. Oh. And I have been tremendously fortunate because these 3 people know their information, and the research group that they have for each committee they're amazing. They're just amazing at what they do. And if they don't have a statistic or an answer, they have it for you at your very next meeting. And so, as I stated, these people have all studied these committees and are so well read in them that they lead, and we try and listen and follow from there.
You know, that's one of the, you had mentioned the research that goes on. That is something that I was rather fascinated with myself, because obviously when things come up in committees, not everybody knows everything that's being discussed, and those things have to be looked into, because you have to have those hard numbers and those hard facts for the committee to move on and continue with the information that they're given. I did have an opportunity several years ago to come to the State House and listen and sit in on some of the committees, and then onto the House and Senate floor both. And so you can see everything that's happening being buoyed up by that research that is taking place. And I'm not sure if a lot of folks know, but you can even call the State House and have questions answered, and the research will be working in your favor there as well. So they really are there to serve us. So.
Absolutely. There's a number where you can call the research, and I think that's in the library, or it starts there. But you have a question, they go to work immediately for you.
Very good.
And it is amazing. And when you walk in, usually to each one of those committees, you start off with a folder that may be like 3/4 of an inch thick, but it doesn't take much time with all of the paperwork that they bring you, whether it's testimony or whether it's research, that pamphlet or whatever ends up about 3 inches, and so then they swap that out because it's too heavy, and they start a new one. And so to read everything is truly impossible, but as people are testifying and giving things, you highlight a lot. But that's what the research department does. They provide you with all of that. It's simply amazing.
Right. All right. And Senator Hawk, tell us about what committees you are on this session.
I have walked into the fire.
Oh.
I thought I was busy in the past. I'm on 11 committees, and we always kind of josh with the House about, we're the upper chamber, and there are only 40 of us to divide the work up, where they have 125. So you wind up getting a lot of committees. So the main committee that is a new assignment for me is, I've been on Ways and Means, but I took Governor Kelly's place on that as a ranking member. So I'll be sitting in on all the conference committee work at the end that makes all of the really tough decisions. And I'm actually excited. I like knowing about all the ins and outs of the budget. And then I'm on 6 budget subcommittees, which we were just finishing up: the lottery, racing, and gaming. I'm on public safety. I'm on ag. I'm on higher ed, and I'm on transportation, and one other one that I can't remember now, because we keep saying, okay, which one are we doing this morning at 7:30 a.m.?
Goodness.
And I drive back and forth, so that getting up at 5 or 5:30 has gotten old. I'm also on utilities. I'm on the transportation committee. And then I was on Rules and Reg, but as I took Laura's place on Ways and Means, we put one of our new members. I'm on the broadband task force, and we've had one meeting, and we're going to meet again on March 28th. I'm very committed to that. I think we have great telecom companies that are rural. We have great big telecoms too, but we need to get more broadband out. So I'm on that, and I was on the Transportation Vision Task Force, and I was on the Governor's Blue Ribbon Water Task Force. So I've had a lot of experience getting a lot of that detail, and I'm sad that we haven't made more progress in all of those areas, but this year we're actually doing some things with some bills, particularly on transportation and in telecom, and on utilities, on energy. So I'm seeing some progress finally after all of these task forces that I've been on.
Goodness. All right, let's go back to Representative Carlson. Go ahead and, if you don't mind, pick out one or two of those things that you've been discussing in committee. Anything that's been standing out, being that you're a very, very new representative, and something that maybe you want to really go after.
I did. They let you request committees. That doesn't mean you're going to get them.
Right.
But
well,
you
perhaps
can
areas that you might feel a little bit more comfortable
And
in.
so I did put down children and seniors, and I was appointed to that committee. Children and seniors, it's a very, like so many of them, it's a very emotional committee. We are dealing with foster care.
Oh, dear. Well,
And that's been a tremendous. But we also are dealing with foster care in the social services budget. We have a lot of the same people testify on both of those committees because they're so entwined in things with KDHE and things like that. But also, the thing that I've been hearing a lot about from constituents is the licensed daycare. Mm-hmm. And the thing is there are a lot of licensed daycares that they're following the law, they're doing things right, they're getting reviewed. People come in and check to make sure that everything is right. But then there are a lot of people that are not doing that. And so we've had that bill, and I'm really not good at, I can't keep track of all the numbers of the bills just yet, but I believe this is House Bill 2228. And what they are wanting to do in that bill is to strengthen the penalties for unlicensed daycares. Now, of course, the opponents want the penalties lowered. And the other thing that has been a problem there, besides just deciding where to set the penalties and then the reoccurring penalties, how much they should be, is that we have a lack of funding. So there is not enough staff to go through and follow up on these as quickly as they should. And so that's a problem too. You can be fined and say you must be licensed. We're going to give you this many days or a month to get licensed, but then someone may not be available to go back within that 30 days. And so that's a problem that they're trying to work out too. It's making sure that every daycare is licensed and following the rules, but then also tied to that is to have enough people on the job that are qualified that can get around and check each one of those violations to make sure that they have completed, got their licensing or fixed whatever the other violations were. So it's that's been a tough thing, and I've had a lot of people that are running licensed daycares that are doing it right, that are saying $500 for your first day and $100 when we come back and you haven't done it. You can't lower that. In the original bill, it was $1,000 for the first violation, and then I think $100 a day after that. But like I said, we're still working on that, and it's a very emotional for people that do daycare and for people that take their children to daycare. So in children and seniors, that's one that's been, kind of in the foremost of our things.
My goodness, yeah, no kidding. Because we're talking about our greatest treasure, those children.
Yes.
And I guess when there's violations, you want them hit where it hurts the most, because you want to spur them to follow the law and to protect the children.
Well, and absolutely,
but
and
for
when
a
they're
daycare person,
it hurts both people. But
sure.
When they go in, they find the violation. You're not licensed. You immediately must close down.
Oh yeah.
So that's the right thing to do. But then you have parents that are saying, "What am I going to do with my child tomorrow? Because I have to go to work." But the only thing I can think of is that you probably should have made sure that it was a licensed daycare to start with.
Wow. Okay, and I'm guessing this is something that is posted on the wall. And is there some place that they can check, like through the state itself?
Yes.
To make sure. Okay.
Yes, they can.
So calling the State House would be calling KDHE.
Yes.
To make sure that your daycare is licensed.
It's licensed, yes.
Very wise move right from the very start.
Yes.
Okay, very good.
And there's a website that you can go to in terms of state government. Mm-hmm. A little hard to navigate through, but you can get that on the web too.
Okay.
And same way with the bills. You can go on Kansas Legislature if you want to know what's happening with some of the things that are in there. Once the bill has been enrolled and it started to being worked, it shows a progress of that on the website too.
All right. Well, Senator Hawk, what is it that you are hearing from your constituents? Let's go with that right off the bat, because you had mentioned, what was it you said a few moments ago? For the first time, they're talking to you about things you wouldn't necessarily.
I think there's some things that I agree with my constituents on philosophically, but the bill, then there's no perfect bill. Every bill, just like Susie was talking in terms of the licensed daycare, of, should you find people that aren't licensed, but what do you do about the real need that parents need to have their kids watch so they don't lose their job? So same thing. So I've had a couple that sort of stand out. Mostly people write me, and I'm in agreement, and I try to write people back. This year's been, with 11 committees, it's been a little harder for me to write people back individually. But an interesting one has been Farm Bureau has recognized that one of the big economic negatives with farmers is them being able to get health care because they're not a member of a group that can get health care like a school district or a large company that has over 50 employees that can offer reasonably priced health care. And so they've tried to come up with a plan to meet that need, but they have to skirt the insurance rules. So they call it an association health benefit plan, not an insurance plan. So I've not been able to support that, but I certainly am supportive of the fact that Farm Bureau is looking for a solution for the Farm Bureau farmers. A couple of things I don't like about it. It doesn't take care of pre-existing conditions. And so that's a problem. It's not regulated by the insurance department, so it doesn't meet the essential benefits that every other health provider. So some of the insurance companies have lobbied pretty heavily against it because they contend because Farm Bureau, you can be a farmer or a Farm Bureau member for $50 if you join. And so the fear from some other health carriers is that particularly young, healthy people will say, well, I can save maybe a couple $100 a month or more if I join the Farm Bureau plan, and I'll leave my plan. So if the healthy people leave an insurance plan, that means the rates go up for us older, sick people that are in there. Now, unfortunately, I've moved into the old sick group. I don't know how that happened. Maybe that's the benefit of aging. But I have grandkids, so I'm happy about that. So anyway, it's been kind of interesting to get people, and I've had a lot of my Farm Bureau friends come in to talk to me, and I have to reluctantly tell them, while I've supported Farm Bureau, and we actually did a resolution for Farm Bureau's, I think, 100th or 150th anniversary, and I helped speak to that. And I've been in the Farm Bureau Masters program, and they've helped me learn a lot about agriculture in the state. So I hate not being able to support it, but I don't think it's quite ready for prime time, and it has some negatives. I'm also angry with the federal people because the president promised he would have cheaper, better health insurance, and Congress promised they'd have cheaper, better health insurance, and they sort of fought against the ACA and have done some things to undermine that. Certainly ACA was not perfect either, and all of our rates have gone up, and I'm really disappointed that Congress has not really addressed health care. And when I was there a couple years ago, I went to a special meeting that they had, and Lamar Hunt was there and had some really good ideas about how to improve the ACA and help all of us, and that didn't happen. So as a consequence, we're having groups like Farm Bureau have to come up with something that sort of doesn't give benefits. And another one of the examples, I keep thinking, I told you about my religious background and my interest as a young man in college and high school to be a minister. Well, it was the story of Solomon having to make a decision about who to give the baby to and whether he should just split the baby in half. You almost have a Solomon dilemma with a Farm Bureau plan because every person is individually rated. So what do you do if you have a healthy baby or a child and one that's not healthy? It may be your healthy one's covered with a Farm Bureau plan, but your unhealthy one is not. And so that could be one of those unintended consequences. And I think they'll work on that problem, but I couldn't get a satisfactory answer as to what one would do about it. So anyway, another example of a great idea but not a perfect plan.
Right. Are you saying that maybe it's just not ready to come to that? In other words, they've got some improvements that they can make on that?
Well, I think they're in a financial dilemma where they don't have a lot of options either, and that's why when I voted against it, I did give them credit for bringing the idea forward, and it did pass. So I'm not sure what will happen. Did it pass the House side? I can't remember.
I don't believe it's come yet.
I don't think it's come to the floor yet. And it was, I think, 26-11 on the Senate floor, so it had good support on the Senate floor. But it's just obviously healthcare is a big dilemma, and I'm disappointed in our democratic system, more so at the federal level than the state level, but that we have not expanded Medicaid, which would help a lot of people, and that we haven't been able to come up with solutions, particularly that address the needs of our farmers and those people who are not in large employee groups.
You know what I don't understand about that is why aren't they made part of a group as if it were a corporation? I mean, obviously that's kind of what Farm Bureau is trying to do.
Yes.
We have a group, and I'm sure there's other groups all across the United States that fit into that type of category.
Most of them, for example, the bankers are a little bit in the same group, except they're not open to anybody. They wouldn't take a person like me. Only I'm a customer, but I'm not a banker. And so the bankers actually have their plan conform with the federal rules, and they have a third-party provider that provides that insurance. Some of it is self-insured, and the rest is a third-party, and I forget the official name of that. But they do it, and I think they've contracted Blue Cross Blue Shield to handle it. So it's very similar to what we may have as state employees. Representative Carlson and I qualify as state employees to have the state insurance plan. Other businesses have to do that, but a farmer usually doesn't have a large number of people. They're a small business, so they can't legally combine. And there is a provision in the state statutes, which they essentially are trying to add themselves as an association. But the other people who are in there as associations, rural electrics are another one, get their insurance, and it still complies with the ACA rules, the essential benefits, have to meet pre-existing conditions, etc. And they're asking for an exception to that to make it financially viable.
Sure. Okay. Well, I think you hit the nail.
Tough issue.
Yeah, it is. And I think you hit the nail on the head. There's so many working parts and, unfortunately, often unintended consequences. Because, there are a lot of working parts.
Well, and it may be in the end, as much as I'm unhappy with the things it doesn't do, in the end it may be imperfect but better than nothing. And so I think that's one of those tough. I wasn't quite ready to give that up, and I still want to put pressure on our U.S. Congress and U.S. Senate to come true to their promises and get something that actually would work for all Americans, not just some at others' expense.
Right. Well, let's talk about school funding. Your background is in education, and I know that that's close to your heart, something that you put a lot of stake into, have a lot of concern for. So where are we at on school funding?
Well, golly, this just became another issue that I agree with some of the people that write me and not with some others. I'm actually with the governor on this one, and with the solution that was put out by the State Board of Education. I'll give a little history for your listeners that we've had off and on litigation since I first got elected to the legislature in 2005, and we've solved that. But the recession in 2008 caused us not to be able to make our financial commitments, and another lawsuit was brought, and we've, I think, gotten to the end of the line on that, and the Supreme Court said we did everything right last year with Senate Bill 61. It was sort of I'm glad you missed that, Susie. That was that might be why Representative Swanson decided to retire. It was very stressful. It came down to the wire.
Education was at her heart as well.
Oh, it was, and I think she was happy with what we did. But nonetheless, the court said, great job, but no cigar quite yet. You did not take into account inflation. So the Supreme Court doesn't tell you exactly what to do dollar-wise. They sort of give you, and they shouldn't. It's their job to interpret the broad law, and then you have to tell them if you've got it right. So the state board said it looks like we need $90 million more. Fortunately, we repealed the Brownback tax experiment, brought our taxes up so the boss is paying taxes, which the boss wasn't, just the employees. So that gave us a relatively healthy balance, and I think we have the money, though it's tight, that we could make that other $90 million payment. Our teachers are still somewhere 42nd in the nation in average pay, so we still are we have not got ourselves up to where we should be as a result of the recession in 2008. So this gets us up, in my view, as close as we can come with the money we have. So we just passed out of the Senate this week that extra $90 million. In the meantime, there's another group that brought the suit called Schools for Fair Funding. Some of them are your large metropolitan districts, I think, like Wichita and Kansas City, Kansas, and I think Garden City may be in that group. Manhattan and Clay Center are not. I think they may be members of that group. Manhattan may be, but is not part of the lawsuit as such. They said we made an error. We didn't compound the effect, essentially, of inflation. I don't think the court is telling us that we had to compound inflation. I think they're just saying we have to account for it, and I think the $90 million a year for the next 4 years does that. So I'm disagreeing with my friends in part of the education community, and I don't really believe we can afford that without a potential tax hike, and I'm not ready to do a tax hike at this time. Last time I did one, I found myself getting unelected when I voted for the 1 cent sales tax. And the Governor Brownback was very much against that till he became governor, and the old political phrase, he was against it before he was for it. So then he used it to balance his budget. Meanwhile, I had to look for another job and did find one, but nonetheless, that's the way politics goes. So it's a big issue, and I think Governor Kelly is right. She thinks that we ought to go with what the State Board of Education says, and the Schools for Fair Funding says they will not buy into that. Where early on they said they would, and then they had second thoughts when they thought about the compounding of inflation. So as I said, here I got my friends in Farm Bureau. Now I have my friends in education. But I don't think they send me there to agree with lobbyists. I don't think they send me there to agree with my friends. I think you send me there to make the best decision possible. And it would probably be the same decision all the people who are not happy would make if they were in my shoes or Susie's shoes. And I think that's what I'm there to do. And I don't like making my friends unhappy, but I can't live with myself if I don't make what I believe is the best long-term decision.
Right. Well, I'm sure that being a politician is not a popularity contest.
I thought it was. It is at election time, and I don't know what happens after that.
That's right. Representative Carlson, a while ago you had mentioned, it might have been before we went on the air, Medicaid expansion, and I think that you have an opinion about that. Would you mind stepping into that arena for us?
No, I don't mind stepping into that at all. I agree with Senator Hawk. Our CanCare, our insurance, isn't fixed, and it should be. It's not perfect, but we have hundreds of thousands of people out there in Kansas, or at least several 100,000, that are working poor. These are not the people that are not getting up and going to work. These are people that are working. They have children. They're trying to make ends meet, and they don't hit the right income levels, and so they cannot afford insurance. So what the Medicaid expansion does is it's there to help those working poor. Would I like to see the government continue to work on better insurance coverage? Yes, I would. Insurance is so tremendously high. It hurts business, it hurts individual families, but I don't think we should make these families that are trying, I don't think they should be penalized for that reason. And I did, and it's a touchy subject. We know that. I know the House is fairly divided on that. And it's, as Senator Hawk said, as Tom said, this isn't it's not a popularity contest. When you walk out with that vote, you're going to have some people happy and some people tremendously not happy. But the thing of it is that it's, I hate to say it, but it's almost like the O.J. Simpson trial. If you were not in the room the whole time to hear all the evidence, then you can't really make a good decision. And what Tom and I are doing is we're sitting in these hearings. We're listening and having all the specialists and all of the information that is coming from all different sides. And then we have to make the best informed decision that we can for our district. Is it going to be the same as a Kansas City or a Wichita? No, it's not for the population and the way things are. But I also did a survey, which I'm not sure if everybody received that. Now, let me see if I can find those results.
From those that responded, you have a...
I had a great... we had over 300 responses so far, and I keep shuffling my papers around. But Medicaid expansion was... I was... Okay, here it is. So... For Medicaid expansion, I asked people, do you strongly support, somewhat support, neutral, somewhat oppose, or strongly oppose? So for strongly support, I have 42% that strongly support. I have 23.7% that somewhat support. 13% are neutral, 9% somewhat oppose, and 10% are completely strongly against.
Interesting.
So that right there, and like I said, with over 300 surveys, you can get a fairly good reading from things. And that spoke very strongly to me about what this district, what my constituents, it hasn't come up for a vote in the House yet, so I'm still listening, and I'm still open to people's opinions, and I'm still receiving them. But
and you want to receive more, I'm
absolutely. And so I am going to be at the Spring Fair next weekend, and I'll give you my information on email and contacts. If someone would like the survey that has not received one, I will get it to them so that their voice can be heard as well.
Right. And
Good.
She's referencing the KCLY Spring Expo, which is taking place on Friday of next week, 10 a.m. until 7:15 p.m. at the National Guard Armory in Clay Center. So if you would like to meet up with Representative Carlson, you can do that at that time. There was something else. Go ahead.
Can I weigh in? I think Representative Carlson is right, and I'm not surprised to see the results you got on your survey. I think the things I've seen is in this somewhat strongly supportive and strongly supportive, about 70% statewide. I'd like your listeners to know what I think is one of the dilemmas with our democratic system that we have is that we are not being allowed to vote on this in the legislature. And it's the technicality of the rules. And I certainly wasn't aware of how difficult it was to get bills voted on. I go back to what I like to tell Mrs. Pullman's class when I come here to Clay Center High School, great government teacher here at Clay Center, about what our system is. And we keep saying we're a democracy. But the way the legislature is set up, the Speaker of the House or the President of the Senate can determine, and the Majority Leader, what we actually get to vote on, what comes up on the calendar, which is called above the line. We also have too much power in the chairs of our committees. So the chair of the public health committees, both in the House and the Senate, have refused to allow that bill to have a hearing. They've had an informational hearing, I think, in the House. We've not in the Senate this year. We did pass Medicaid expansion, and the governor vetoed it, and then we didn't overcome the veto. But we had a very strong majority the last time we had Medicaid expansion. So I think it is not the right way to operate the legislature or a democracy if a strong majority of the people who are elected and the people in the state who elected them want to have something. I do agree, just like with the Farm Bureau plan, that it's not a bad idea, but it's not perfect. The same way Medicaid expansion is not perfect. Their argument is that we ought to take care of the waiting list first, and that it's going to cost us too much money. The Hospital Association, who wants to keep our rural hospital, like the great one we have in Clay Center, operating, needs to have those funds from the people who come in that they must give service to, but they're not reimbursed for that service if they don't pay, and they can't pay. So we just had the hospital in Horton closed down. We had the hospital in Fort Scott, hospital in Independence. There are approximately 20 to 30% of the rural hospitals that could be in jeopardy of going under. And the way the federal law was written, some of the money they sent to help hospitals got put into Medicaid expansion, and then the Supreme Court ruled that that was not legitimate. It should be a statewide vote. At that time, the governor had the ability to make that vote and determine that without the legislature. Our legislature took that power away from the governor. And so I am disappointed in our state of Kansas allowing our system to get bottled up. We give this power to chairs and we give it to the speaker and the president of the majority party as a way to expedite legislation and not get bogged down with things that are unimportant. What has happened is that has been turned on its head, and we're not allowing the important things. Now, I could live with it being voted down. I can't live with it not having a vote.
Right.
And I agree so strongly with Tom. I think that's probably one of the biggest surprises to me is that something as important to this may not ever reach the floor to have a vote. And since I'm in social services budget, there it was. And there was $14 million in the KAHD budget that the governor had put there. So we had a vote that the chairman had put in that he felt like the KDHE was too big of a budget for us to, in committee, work on. And so he wanted us to take that out and hand it on to the next. Well, I didn't understand at the time that meant it may never get to another committee. It was just going to be gone. And when I found that out, I had to vote against my chairman, so I was one of two Republicans, and the vote was 4-5, and it moved on. Now, in appropriations, they stripped the $14 million out of it. And so, now it doesn't mean that it can't go anyplace, but it's as Tom said, on something so big, it is up to that committee, to that chairman, whether that gets to move above the line or not. And that has totally shocked me. That's just such an important thing. And even here, a few months ago, I spoke with our CEO at the hospital, Austin Gillard, who I think is fabulous. And at that point in time, I guess it's been several months ago, he didn't think that Medicaid expansion was that big of a deal here because luckily our hospital is in the black. It's running very well. But as he stated in a letter to me, he said Kansas is just one of 14 remaining states that have not expended Medicaid. And these are families who desperately need it. And he said more than $3 billion in federal funding designated for health care in our state has left Kansas since January of 2014. And without CanCare expansion, another $1.8 million leaves our state every year. And that's because CanCare it's 90% federal, 10% of the state general fund. And so these other states that have expanded are receiving all that federal, and we are not. And he says here that expanding in 2019, expansion would bring $2.3 billion in federal dollars to Kansas over the next 3 years. And 150,000 hardworking, low-income Kansans who simply cannot afford private health insurance would be able to receive it. And he says of the 108 rural hospitals in Kansas, 85% currently have a negative margin, and 70% have a negative margin below 3%. 31 of these rural Kansas hospitals were classified as vulnerable and at risk. In the last 2 years, 3 rural hospitals in Kansas have closed. Now, the other problem about that is besides just the health care, what happens when your hospital closes? You lose population. Your doctors have to go somewhere and find jobs. Your nurses have to go someplace and find jobs. The dietitians, everywhere. Everyone loses because those people have to go somewhere to make a living, and so sales tax goes down, everything goes down, and it's our communities that are losing in a complete way if that happens.
Well, it reminds me of the grocery problem. When you lose a grocery store, you lose your hospital. What happens to your community at that point? In fact, I was curious if really would and I can't remember what Austin Gillard had said about our hospital in particular, how much extra that would mean for our hospital. And so I'm wondering if we had expansion, would that have saved, say, the hospital at Horton? I don't know that we're talking that much money, but it certainly would have made a difference.
I don't think that in and of itself, and this is the argument that the people who are opposed to Medicaid say, that it wouldn't in and of itself save a hospital. But I don't think you can lose that amount of money, $3 billion of our taxpayers' dollars, going to other states because we didn't take advantage of it. And I don't want to be in that 14-state group that hadn't. And most of those states are Republican-controlled states. Interesting enough, it's often seen as a partisan issue. I don't think it is.
Okay.
But I think we have to be careful about it because that can mean the difference of doing the other things like management practices, appropriately pricing your services, having enough community support. It's not the one single thing, but that added on to the other things that small communities and hospitals face, I think can be the final dagger that closes that hospital.
I'd like to remind our listeners, you're listening to a legislative update. We are live at the radio station here in Clay Center. We have with us Senator Tom Hawk and Representative Susie Carlson. Okay, goodness, that took some time, and I know I stuck education there in the middle, but I wanted to get Susie's take on expansion of Medicaid. Senator Hawk, you had mentioned a couple of things that you were kind of had some concerns about. One of them was fire suppression and the training for our Kansas doesn't have its own wildland forestry firefighting group. It's all localized, and we know that when the fires took place down in southwest Kansas, that these were all local groups trying to fight to battle those fires, and it does take a little bit of extra training. Tell us about what it is that you're working on to try to get some more money for that training.
The State Forestry Division at Kansas State University, which is largely funded with federal dollars. I think they have a $5 or $6 million budget, but only about $300,000 to $400,000 of that comes from state general fund that flows through K-State. And the new farm bill may or may not cut some of that federal funding for wildfire services. And what they largely do is train rural firefighters who are volunteer fire. In fact, I moved into an area of Manhattan. Turned out we didn't have city fire service. I became a volunteer firefighter about 25, 30 years ago when we moved. Surprised my wife, and when my kids went to school and said, "What's your daddy do for a living?" My son said, "I'm not sure. I think he's a fireman." So I said, well, only part-time, honey. But at any rate, I took the training at the State Forest Service. They get some of the extra equipment that the military no longer uses, and they rehab that equipment so it is in working order and can be used for firefighting. Turns out that equipment has grown in size, no longer fits in their garage, so they can't work on it during the winter. because they can't close the garage doors and have the truck in there, so they have to wait till the weather's better.
Our local rural recently got a new building.
Yes, they did.
Same reason. So at any rate, we did an audit, a legislative post audit that looks at all kinds of questions about how we spend state dollars and whether our programs work, and they concluded essentially that the state forestry needed to take a stronger lead role in it, but they needed more people. So I've done an amendment to our higher ed budget, but we did it through ag. So kind of interesting. I was on both those committees, and we just approved that on Thursday to try and give them $1.45 million. But part of that is just sort of like a line of credit at your bank. If we have the fires, they can then send people out and pay them, local firefighters who are volunteers, to go down, like the Starbucks fire we had down close to the Oklahoma border that did $50-60 million worth of damage. And that's not even counting the economic. That's just the fences and the things that were lost. So I think it's an important thing for us to do. It's going to be tough in this climate to come up with that extra $1.4 million. And I'm not critical. Our Guard wants to take a more active role and pre-position Black Hawk helicopters. They're outfitting some trucks. They're trying to train 30 or 40 guardsmen that could be pre-positioned. We did a much better job last year coordinating with the State Forest Service, Kansas, or KDEM, which is Emergency Management, and the State Fire Marshal, who go to Topeka and help man the incident command center. But that, again, we're a local control state, so it's the local firefighters that do the work in the fire districts and the rural. But even the last fire that got out of control almost got to Hutchinson and could have caused a lot of home damage. So this doesn't look like an important area till you hit this March, April timeframe in May, and then you start seeing that we have a lot of fuel out there. Now we have a lot of moisture, so we're going to have a lot of grass built up. And so it's a hazard that I think with our weather conditions and then the droughts, we're going to have to be more active. And this is, my attempt is just to get on the front end of this and not have another one of those large fires like we had 2 years in a row, and then say, oh, golly, I wish we would have trained more people and had more equipment. So,
wow.
And thank goodness for the State Forestry Service that is tasked by statute, both federally and statewide, to be one of the major players, but only one of three to do it, but certainly a key player.
All right, very good.
And there was a new committee that was started this year in the House, and it's called Rural Revitalization. And Don Heineman is the chair of that, and it's a wonderful committee. It's trying to keep, the rural communities healthy and strong, and not letting everything kind of move away. But the only place I've really heard about this, which it was wonderful as a presentation, was at the Rural Revitalization lunch that we had, and they brought the people in about this rural fire and things, and it was very impressive, and it's like Tom said, we look back on that fire and all of the livestock and all of the everything that was taken, and the horrible stories that you heard about these people, that their lives were changed forever. And there are ways, you can't always prevent a natural disaster. We know that. But there are steps that we can take to be ready to do far more than we have.
Well, and to minimize the effects once that kind of thing gets going.
Well, every minute that passes before you address a wildfire, I think it doubles, and so it's critical to be able to respond to those and to pre-position your resources where you think. When you look at we've done so much better with technology and looking at weather conditions where we actually can predict the danger areas, and we've not been able to do that until as of late.
Wow. All right. Okay, we have a couple of other pieces of information, specifically from Senator Hawk's newsletter. However, I wanted to ask you, you had referenced an educator here locally in Clay
Yes.
Center, Laura Pullman.
Yes.
You have opportunity, you had mentioned from time to time, to go in and speak with her students. And I wanted to give you a moment to, and not that I want
Well.
to take anything away from Representative
no.
Carlson here, but
Well,
it's something that you have an opportunity to do from time to time. And I think it makes a great impact on our students to have a senator there to kind of teach them, walk them through things, and go ahead and chat with me about that a little bit. If
I
you would.
will, and I want to compliment Representative Carlson. Before she even took office, had me come do a joint panel with her and some local law enforcement and fire chief with some fourth graders, which was just a lot of fun. But I just love the job that Laura Pullman is doing with her government class and her students, because I think she's really teaching them not just what's in the book and the theory. She's getting them out to see how government works. And this week I had 3 young men come, and 2 weeks ago I had 2 young ladies come. We call them shadows. And the young men got a rare treat because we went in and met the governor. And then I had some lobbyists in on a kind of a touchy, and I have them just stand with me. And sometimes if I have a chair, they can sit. If not, they stand, and they come to all my committee meetings. And it was kind of a rough and tumble day. And then we got them on the floor and got them introduced. But when I asked them what they liked, they said they had no idea how the lobby thing worked. And I said, well, we get a lot of good information from lobbyists. I have to remind the lobbyists that some of them contribute to my campaign, some do not. But I said, it doesn't affect my vote. I don't care if you contribute or not. I want you to be an information source. And I say it's sort of like when you buy a car, and I use the Ford Chevy thing. The best way to figure out if you want the latest model Ford or Chevy, if you're kind of thinking you want the Chevy, well, go to the Ford dealer and tell them you're looking at this Chevy, and they'll tell you everything that's wrong with the Chevy, and then ask them which Ford should I get, and then they tell you, and then you go to the Chevy dealer and say, I really was going to buy your Chevy, but now I'm kind of sweet on this Ford, and they'll tell you what's wrong with the Ford. That's the way I do with my lobbyists. I like to have both sides come in. And by the time I can quickly digest what the peanut of the issue is. And so these students got to see me do that with the lobbyist, and they thought that was pretty sweet that they did it. And I tell them, well, you have to stay on my tail because I got my 11 committees, and they don't all meet every day. So they kept up with me. We were running up and down the stairs and in the elevator and in the committee rooms, and they were paying attention. And then I make them ask a question at the end. And we had a luncheon over at one of the lobbyists that promotes the transportation plan, and 3 of my transportation senators were there. And I said, well, ask these guys questions, and the lobbyist who had actually done national lobbying. So they got a really good taste. Probably one of the best days I've had in my entire career of having these students, and I was so proud of them because they were so grown up and mature and savvy. And by the end of the day, I asked them what they didn't want to be, and they said, well, they didn't want to work fast food, and they didn't want to be a politician. And I said, well, maybe by the end of the day, politician might be on your list. So fun day.
Well,
yeah.
Kudos to Laura Pullman. My daughter went to school here, and my son-in-law, and I know that, in fact, some of the staff here at KCLY have also mentioned what a great teacher she is. And
Yes.
I think that the key, in addition to a lot of different experiences, is teaching the students to really think for themselves.
Absolutely.
Giving them a lot of different tools and teaching them to think for themselves. We have roughly 7 minutes left, and I don't want to let...
I told you it'd go fast.
You did.
She's great.
No. You guys
She's
have been
the
doing all the
best.
talking, and I do appreciate it. Representative Carlson, is there something else that you would like to cover before we're done here? Anything else that you would like to share in regards to an update for our listeners today?
You know, there's so many things. It's like Tom said, my heavens, it has gone so quickly. There's things I'd like to say about Miss Pullman's class. I went there with Zoe Ald. I was invited to hear their presentation in her class on what America meant. Okay, now these were like juniors and seniors, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, with all the knee taking, everything, I was really worried about what I was going to see. They each got up on the stage, and a lot of them had visual things. And every one of them touched my heart. They were positive. They were so pro-America, and it just warmed me because I was really worried.
And I would be too. I can see exactly what you're saying because there is so much divisiveness.
Yes, not
in
a
our
one,
nation.
not a one. So the other thing I just want to touch on lightly, and I'll do this as quickly as I can, is the rest of the survey. Some of the things that surprised me in this area is I put the online gambling on there. 16.3% strongly support, 14.4% somewhat approve, 31% are neutral, and then 10% somewhat are do not want it, and 26% said strongly no. I mean, that just
And back up to the top, what was the
strongly support is 16.3.
and
Somewhat support is 14.4.
And at the bottom again was
10.8.
no, the 26.
Right, and then 26 strongly opposed, but
Oh.
31% were neutral. And then the other thing that surprised me on the internet tax, 29% strongly support it, 15% somewhat, 16% are neutral, and 28.4% are strongly opposed. And that,
And there's an awful lot of online shopping going on.
Yes, and then, okay, here's the big one, marijuana. 55% voted that they would be in favor of reducing the penalties on nonviolent distribution of marijuana, just personal use. 85% are in favor of medical marijuana. That just shocked me. And 30% were in favor of recreational marijuana.
30%. Wow.
Yeah. But
Well, and I think there's been a lot of good press about the benefits.
I was just, the numbers just
I guess
shocked me.
what I don't
Those are
understand is-
smoking results.
Smoking results. Well,
Oh,
cha-cha-ching right there from the senator himself.
Sorry.
that was good.
Senator
Okay.
Hawk, any last pieces of information that you want to cover?
Well, I want to do a shout out to Mayor Jimmy Thatcher, who we had up. We're trying to keep our Flint Hills regional economic development going. And Jimmy came up with a group of people and is a very strong representative for Clay Center and our region. If I go back 20, 30 years ago, it was sort of, I hate to say this, but it was sort of Manhattan against Junction City and vice versa.
And now they're working together so
And they're
well.
working together. And there's, with the annual chamber retreat, has had several different groups in the region. So there's this recognition that we need to think about our region, bringing people in, that Fort Riley is such a huge economic force, but we have great businesses here in Clay Center. We've got a lot of development going in Pot County and Wamego area, Junction City. So we have begun to look at this, and Jimmy and I and another group met with the Lieutenant Governor and trying to kind of get some support to keep that structure that we have there all the way from the ADA-bus and the regional transportation to all of the things we're doing to attract businesses. The other thing I wanted to mention, which I think is one of those things, it seems like they all fall into this category of half my friends are for it and half my friends are against it, and I'm going with my friends on this one. That's the tax cut. And Senate Bill 22 was originally to decouple, since Trump's tax plan allows people to increase their federal standard deduction to $24,000. So then it's not worth it to itemize on your state, and ours is less than that. So at any rate, it's not a good bill because it puts a $500 million hole in our budget that we can't afford and largely gives money to out-of-state giant multinational corporations. So I didn't vote for it. I'll work on the decoupling piece in a separate bill, but we didn't have that choice. So,
Okay, very
unfortunately, we just have to. There's some politics being played there, and I think the governor will veto it. And I hope that we don't override her veto, because we need that money for my fire suppression. We need it for the transportation plan. We need it to fund our schools. We need it for our highways. We need it for potentially Medicaid expansion. We need it for our disabled people at Big Lakes. We need it for mental health. We still have a lot of needs that were unmet because of the Brownback tax experiment, cut taxes so drastically. We have not kept our infrastructure up. Sorry to say.
And I do, the legislature seems to favor as well with Tom. We feel as though we passed it, feeling that it will come back, and then we can start working on it strongly. There are good points of this bill.
Yes.
It's like anything else. It's like Tom said, there's no perfect bill. There were good parts of this that if you decouple, that means you can itemize on one, not on the other, because of the federal that passed last year. But it's not perfect, and it could be better, and it should be better. So we're in agreement there.
All right.
All right.
Thank you both so very much once again for joining us, and our very deep thanks to AT&T for their continued support, continuous sponsoring of this, not just this particular legislative update, but the others that I've heard of throughout the KCLY community. But of course, we definitely appreciate it here. It allows us to put both of you on the air and give us an opportunity to let your constituents know what's happening and give them an update as to what's happening at the State House. You've been listening to a legislative update live here on KCLY with Senator Tom Huck and Representative Susie Carlson. And for KCLY News, for the very last time, I'm Michelle Tessaro.